1 p.m. Dooovid is here. He's a fellow YouTuber, and we often discuss politics and its intersection with religion, particularly Judaism and Israel. Dooovid, how are you?
Thank God. Yeah, happy Hanukkah, Baruch Hashem. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving.
Yep. I've been noticing recently a lot of interviews popping up, including one that you conducted on your YouTube channel with Edward Dutton, who he's a historian. He's an academic. I guess he lives in Finland, and he's
an evolutionary psychologist who I guess had a PhD in some sort of theology and some sort of atheism. Most famous recently for he had streamed with Richard Spencer for months.
Right. And he also has a book. I think Richard Spencer has started a book publishing, and I think he's publishing either his books or his papers. And
a book on
my
Islam
impression
as a group strategy.
I'm trying to get my handle around what he's about, because I've heard him. He's quite articulate and even somewhat amusing, and he's on a lot of programs. And I get the sense that there are two things about him, and maybe you could focus on, and we should discuss this either way. But one of them is that he is very much into the theory of evolution and atheistic orientation, believes that there are evolved species, including human species, and then he veers into what I suppose is the natural and logical practice of the theory of evolution, which is eugenics. And that, of course, was scientized by Charles Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, who actually coined the word eugenics, which means good birth. And he seems to analyze cultures and people in different professions and different areas in terms of whether or not they are more or less evolved than other people. And his evidence of that is the claim that different groups have a higher or a lower IQ than other people. I mean, he says that, for example, people who have PhDs in the STEM subjects, the sciences, have a higher IQ than those who have PhDs in the social sciences. And I think underlying his analysis, correct me if I'm wrong, is basically a eugenic idea that some people and some groups of people are more or less evolved than others.
Well, I'm not sure if you're using the word eugenics properly, because eugenics is a social planning strategy about something that should be done, as opposed to just an understanding of why things are the way they are. So he's an academic. He had actually worked with Richard Lynn, and I think he actually lost his job in Finland related to studies with Richard Lynn, who, I don't know if you want to call him philo-Semitic, and even, Richard Spencer, Edward Dutton, a kind of philo-Semitic. And Richard Lynn had written this book, also published by Richard Spencer, forward, about the marvelous achievements of Jews. And it's just a collection of Jews and our accomplishments and IQ studies, and clearly showing that Jews are overaccomplished, although there is some question about the role that Jews play in Western societies. But I would classify Spencer, Dutton, and Lynn as largely philo-Semitic. I mean, eugenics is an idea about what we should do about these things. So, I mean, Dutton is kind of pessimistic and not necessarily telling people that there is anything that could be done more. Evolutionary psychology, and that's the same field as Kevin McDonald, evolutionary psychology. And so I'm not sure if he's saying anything bad. Just that different groups have different strategies and group strategies, and largely understanding it from environmental, historical reasons. So not necessarily, even if you want to talk about psychopathy or cold winter theory or violence as a group strategy. And so he's more a scholar. He published many papers. He's constantly publishing papers. He's done academic studies, and his actually I forget the name, his PhD, he studied under a famous Jewish academic. And so I would classify Dutton as philo-Semitic in a certain way, although he does question the role that Jews have in Western culture, and he largely agrees with Kevin McDonald that Jews have an influence in the deterioration of values in the West and pushing for liberalism. But he's not, like a political activist or necessarily like a eugenicist, more just an academic.
Well, first of all, I want to touch on what you mean by philo-Semitic. I mean, the term means somebody who's favorable toward the Jews as opposed to anti-Semitic. And
I meant in that he's.
I understand. But the way you approach the concept is that they are philo-Semitic, quote unquote, based on the Jew as a race. They're looking at biological elements in Judaism, and they do believe that in a way the Jew is more evolved than non-Jews, mainly because of our ethnocentricity over many.
You put it in a way that he wouldn't put it when you say more evolved. You're saying that.
I've listened to him enough.
Circumstances.
No, Dooovid. I've listened enough. Excuse me. I've listened enough to him that this idea of that because of our ethnocentricity over many centuries and our intermarriage with each other and our exclusion of non-Jews, we have biologically evolved. And that is what eugenics is. Eugenics is a biological theory. It is very much a partner with Darwin's evolutionary theory, which was completely oriented in that way. I mean, if you look at, he favored races over one race over another. I mean, Darwin believed that the English were more evolved than the Irish and the Scottish. And, he does it, he views thus, I think it's a rather corrupted version of being pro-Jewish. I mean, philo-Semitic, if you're looking at the success of the Jewish people to the degree we've been successful because of our race and because of our biological makeup. And it's not necessarily inconsistent with a strain within Judaism. I mean, we could go back to Moses Hess in the 19th century, who was a friend of and a contemporary of both Karl Marx and Michael Bakunin, who was the sort of the founder of Russian Marxism and anarchy. And that is that Hess believed that he looked at Judaism as a race. So didn't Wilhelm Marr, the sort of the progressive late 19th century German journalist who coined the phrase and the term anti-Semitism, and looked at Jews and at other people as kind of in a racial context, not necessarily as a race as we define it today, but as a biological grouping, and that various biological groups were either inferior to or superior to other groups. So that when and by the way, this was also the Nazi view of Jews.
I mean, you add like a moral good or bad, as opposed to saying that we are a distinct people and have good.
Well, I do think it's immoral.
Bad characteristics that go together.
Well, I think it's immoral.
As an evolutionist, I'm saying, but you straw man his theory, because as an evolutionist, he wouldn't have any moral judgment. There is no good or bad.
Well, all right, he may not, but I do. I think it's immoral. But the point is that it's similar.
And he actually has more dystopian views that
I understand, but we're talking about this view right now.
Of the West, and
I get that, but we're talking about this particular theory. And
as the higher IQ people are breeding less, and he's a big promoter. He actually convinced me about the reverse Flynn effect and the Flynn effect.
Okay, well, before we go there, let me just finish my thought about the Nazis. This was very similar to the way the Nazis viewed Judaism, in that they did not view Jews as an inferior race, actually. I mean, that's kind of what we generally assume. They viewed other people as part of an inferior race, like they believed the Slavs were inferior, the Poles and the Russians and the Czechs. But they actually believed that the Jews were more evolved. They were superior, which is why they had to destroy the Jews, because they believed that they were competitive with the Aryan race and that they were evil. So, but they were more biologically evolved because of this ethnocentric view. And I do say that not only is it immoral to look at people collectively in a biological context, but I think it's unscientific and I think it's wrong.
Well, I mean, I think you have probably misunderstandings of the theory of evolution, especially when you mix morality into it and you use the term more evolved, because I think from an evolutionary view there is no such thing.
Oh, it is, Dooovid. I disagree. What does the word evolution mean? It's to evolve, to become more superior. I mean, and in Darwin's case, it was the biological theory.
People historically, but I mean, that's not what Dutton's saying, and there's
Okay,
trade-offs
maybe
to
not,
it.
but that's what the
And the
evolutionary theory
concept
is.
of saying better or worse, good or bad, just saying that we select for certain traits from an evolutionary view. It's not something that we do like eugenics. It's not something done out of our own volition and free will. Dutton might even to reject the concept of free will, and there's trade-offs to it, and the major trade-off of
Well, yeah, I think he doesn't recognize free will, and I think this whole idea that somehow IQ, for example, can be biologically passed down is false. You and I can know people. I mean, I personally could know several people who their parents have very high IQs, as the term is conventionally defined. How they got there is something that you and I may differ on. But the point is that their children do not. Their children are quite the opposite. They have low IQs in terms of achievement. Now, I think that IQ is not necessarily and is biological at all. It might be a little biological, but for the most part, it has to do with the development of will and character and values and determination and luck, and all sorts of other very complex factors that go into a person achieving and thus having a quote unquote higher IQ. And it has nothing to do with biology. It's not, you don't breed high IQ. That's something that is the eugenic basis. And I do sense that that's something that these guys embrace, and it's wrong. It's, it takes away, as you mentioned, the concept not only of free will, but of individual ability. It kind of runs against, I think, science, but it also runs against the very basic philosophy of the United States, which is that, we're all equal under God, and we all make our own opportunities, and we achieve based on what, our own volition. We may fail for the same reason, but we're not born into something, and it's because our parents were successful. That doesn't rub off on us, certainly not biologically. It might rub off on us because we're exposed to more interesting things, and we're given more opportunities, but it's not a biological matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think the evidence is largely against what you're saying. I mean, you're not a scientist. The studies are quite clear. I actually went to a school, founded by the Frankfurt School, disciples of the Frankfurt School and Freud, that you had to test higher than 130 IQ to get into. I mean, there's
but how did they get to that? I mean, how, the point I'm making is that you can test.
The studies are clear that IQ is a correlation of like a 0.6 factor. I mean, Binet, there's been hundreds of IQ studies over 100 years, and I think you're misusing the word eugenics.
Yeah, but did IQ come from biology, Dooovid? That's the question. I don't question that. I don't question the fact that IQ exists.
It's largely hereditary. That
I reject that.
It doesn't matter what you reject.
I don't think studies prove that at all. I don't think so. I don't think.
I mean, you could.
I'd like to see a single study that shows that, because I don't think that it's hereditary in a biological sense. As I said, it might be hereditary in that.
No, it was actually the Jewish organization that did the most
I don't doubt
widely quoted study of the twin studies, and now, I mean, it would have been seen as immoral, but it was through the Jewish agency.
I don't doubt that at all.
They did. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the twin study. It was through a Jewish adoption agency. Most of the participants were Jews, and they purposely did it in order that they could study it, where they separated twins at birth and had them raised in different environments, and that the IQs tended to be largely the same between twins, even raised in different environments. And that, I mean, today that would be considered immoral. I could look up the name. It was done in the 50s. It was done in the 50s.
I just don't know if it's all that.
The Jewish agency of New York that did these twin studies.
Yeah,
there's all sorts of studies, but the most famous studies showing the hereditariness of IQ is through twins separated at birth, raised in different circumstances that share the exact same genetics. And
well, that might have something also. If you,
I mean, you said there's no evidence, but
I'm only let me talk about
evidence.
No, I don't think there is.
You mentioned that was conducted through the Jewish
talk about
agency.
that briefly, because I've heard of this study. I haven't looked at it deeply, but when you take a look at anything like that in studies and statistics, especially when you're dealing with social questions, you have to open the lens and consider a complex body of factors. And I think that one of the most glaring factors in any kind of a study like that with twins, and by the way, those same twin studies were done by Mangala, is that there is something very unique about twins. It's not so much that they both came from the same embryo. There is something that they are going to be similar, whether that be a low, medium, or high IQ, and that has to be factored in. But even Darwin, and in the early Darwinian period, I think it was his rival, that being Wallace, who eventually would be airbrushed out of the lexicon of great evolutionary thinkers, even though he was. He had a break with Darwin mainly because of the Jivaro tribesmen. I don't know if you're familiar with this. This man was basically taken as an infant from the Jivaro tribe of Java, which is in Indonesia, and brought up in a British household. And I think there were a couple of others like that. And he grew up to be as British and as educated and as acclimated as any British native. And it had nothing to do with his biology. It had to do with his upbringing, what he was exposed to as a child, the culture that he grew up in, and the development of his own character. And I think that is something that many more studies will indicate that is really more the issue. It's an issue of culture, it's an issue of character, it's an issue of ideas, and it's an issue of personal strength and luck. You and I are lucky because we were born in the United States. That accounts for a lot of our ability. If we had been born in New Guinea, we might be a little different. But it has nothing to do with biology. It has to do with the atmosphere and the situation where you exist and what you do with that. And again, I'm not going to name names here because because in one case it's a rather well-known person, and I think we all know people like this. The parents are among the highest achieving people in the country in this case. And the two children are idiots, not idiots, but you know what I mean? They're underachieving, they're screwed up, they're not functional people. They're basically living. This is, in a sense, you're talking about why the whole infrastructure of aristocracy was overthrown in Europe, because the aristocrats were not passing on good genes. They were inferior. They were like ordinary people. Some were good, some were bad. And it was a more I'm talking about maybe a more egalitarian outlook here. That achievement is what, excuse me?
You're really just preaching. You're not examining
no, I'm examining
evidence or study, and you're not.
No, I am talking about studies. I'm talking about the Jivaro study. I'm talking about basic common sense observation. I'm not preaching. I've thought about this intensely. That this idea that somehow we biologically inherit something, it's a very minor factor. It's the major factor is the environment that you live in and who you are. That's not a preach. That's a contention.
Yeah, there's been countless studies, and it's actually a woman, Viola Bernard, a Jewish woman, who did the most famous study that couldn't be replicated today through the Jewish Adoption Agency in New York, and saying to show the hereditary of intelligence. And so there were mass studies in California that tracked people over decades. If you give a correlation number between parents' IQ and kids' IQ, that you have exceptions, but the number has been extremely well documented. There's been millions and millions of people tested. There's been many. Yeah,
I reject all of it. Let's talk about
because you just haven't done the research.
I've talked about alternative studies and basic observation, which shows that this is untrue. These are these kinds of
Murray and Bernstein,
especially Murray and the bell curve. These are things that you have to open the lens and take a look at. Very many complex aspects that led to that. I would contend that biology is way down the list in terms of the causes of that. It has more to do with culture, it has more to do with circumstance, and it has more to do with character. So what else is going on, Dooovid?
Well, I mean, it's Hanukkah right now, so I guess some of the big news. I guess obviously the abortion case that's likely to reach the Supreme Court.
Yeah, interesting.
There's going to be some sort of overthrow Roe versus Wade.
Yes.
The new Omnicom.
Let's talk about both of those. That's real. Those are great topics.
I'll mention a few more. Eric Zemmour in the French election. That it's becoming bigger in bigger news. I looked into that a little bit. I guess Israel and the Iranian negotiations, and I watched your interview also with Shay about the butts in the Holocaust, and I actually read that book, The Hoax of the 20th Century, and I mentioned that I get Holocaust now regular in my Discord. I would say probably the most common question I get asked is about the Holocaust, specifically people skeptical of it, and
at Northwestern University, no less.
Well, no, I mean, that's a famous academic who actually wrote a book. I mean, most of the people who are skeptical of it are not academic, although a lot of them are Jews. I say, like, a lot of mixed-blooded Jews. A lot of Jews are also skeptical, and there's a webpage, Holocaust Handbooks, that has like 40 books. I've read at least 30 of them.
It's outrageous.
Some of them very well documented, and looking at you're trying to get the history of what actually happened. And there's a lot of narrative, there's a lot of propaganda about the Holocaust to separate what actually happened, what is the evidence, and then the psychology that I would say, why is it that your denial I would put as largely the default, that a person doesn't, that if you take a young kid who doesn't know much about history, that it would make sense to me that like half of people are skeptical of this history. And then the method of the education or the way that goes about, how do you, like, people don't even know the three branches of government. People haven't even heard of the founding fathers of America, let alone like the history in our hometowns. How are people going to believe, such a, God forbid, a horrid event that goes against what people would expect of history to, believe something that happened overseas a long time ago, God forbid, but I did find that interesting in watching that lecture. But I think there's a lot of, we talked about the mandatory Holocaust education, and
well, I agree. I would take issue with some of the Holocaust education. I mean, like, for example, here in Boston, we have this group. What do they call it? Our bodies, ourselves. One of those funny kind of names, and they're involved with the Holocaust education in schools. But they don't really have that much to say about actually examining Nazism and why this happened. They're more into left-wing, propaganda and stuff that has nothing to do with the Holocaust. Having said that,
denial that
and I think that
most
probably
of the mention
does.
of the event is related to,
well, because they
trying to tell people what they don't want to do.
Yeah, and it loses credibility because they don't have any credibility. They're an ideological group. But putting that aside,
Ralph from Germany or London in the chat on YouTube, and he's in Europe and he deals with a whole bunch of that streaming, just letting random people on in where it's actually illegal, but the numbers are increasing.
I mean, putting aside the bad education around the Holocaust, the Holocaust happened. 6 million Jews were annihilated by the Nazi socialists. Now, I want to go back to the topic of the present Supreme Court case regarding abortion and the Mississippi case that's now being argued. First of all, it doesn't seem to me that the Mississippi law actually violates Roe versus Wade, because Roe versus Wade says that in the second trimester of the pregnancy, the state can regulate abortion. And it also says that in the third trimester of the pregnancy, the state can ban abortion. So the Mississippi law basically deals with abortion in the second trimester. And look, personally, I don't support a complete ban of abortion in the second trimester, because I think there might be, especially if the life of the mother is at risk, And if someone's going to die unless they have an abortion, then they have to have the abortion. But at the same time, it is a severely questionable practice morally. And if you take a look at that point, that in gestation, the baby is already, developed and is feeling things, and the science indicates that you have a child at that point. So it is a very, very grave matter, and it's one that I think it's reasonable for a state to limit abortions at that stage. But it doesn't actually overthrow Roe versus Wade. And while I do support legal abortion, at least at that time, under very specific circumstances, at the same time, I think it's an amazing thing to see this overthrown, because it is not in the US Constitution. It is a state law, and that, let the states decide policy like that, because that's really what the American system's about. Questions like that, life and death questions, abortion, death penalty, suicide, euthanasia. These are profound moral questions that are better off decided by states and local municipalities where people live, and where they want to have their values reflected. And that the US government, and the Supreme Court, they really should stay out of it unless you have a situation that is egregious. And in Massachusetts, for example, we have recently, for reasons that are really not clear, about a year ago, our state legislature actually liberalized their abortion laws to include babies after the birth. And to me, that's like going back to the ancient Greeks, where you would have a child would be born and you would have a judge decide whether or not that child would be allowed to live. They would, and if the child was deemed to be a useless eater or not going to be beneficial to the state, then they would put the child on the side of a mountain and let him die. And that's what this former governor of Virginia talked about in an NPR debate. He's a pediatrician, where he said that, if a baby is born, in the case where they were trying to do an abortion, they would put the baby off in a blanket somewhere and let him die. And even those two NPR hosts, these two women, very liberal, who were hosting him, they looked shocked. And it's a profound moral question. So, I'd like to see that become successful. I mean, Clarence Thomas was on fire during that debate. It's like he's been waiting 40 years for this. And Sotomayor was completely unhinged in her comments. Oh, this is going to be, this is political. Abortion is not political. To question the abortion, that's political, and it's going to undo our whole system. And you think we're having another coronavirus or something, or another, it's just, it's really fraught with emotion. My prediction is that the case will uphold the Mississippi law. It will not end Roe versus Wade, but it will change it. It'll strengthen the second trimester rights of states to make laws, and that there won't be a huge protest, because the science and the morals are on the side of restricting abortion, not eliminating it, but regulating it in a way that makes it a serious question, at least. What say you, Dooovid?
I mentioned, just quickly also that God forbid the school shooting that was like 15 minutes from where I live, the one in Oxford, Michigan, that's in Oakland County. I'd mentioned I was trying to set you up to debate the Great Replacement, and I'll tie this in a second. So it turns out that this guy, Brandon Martinez, that's kind of like a neo-Nazi now. So this guy from London, Joseph Cohn, did one of these kind of like Stop Anti-Semitism hit pieces. And it turns out that he got his start as a Palestinian activist and was actually employed or a journalist for Press TV, and wrote like 2 anti-Semitic conspiracy books for Press TV, although the channel Politically Provoked had some issues. So, if I will be able to book you to debate this guy, Great. Brandon Martinez. So it was interesting that he's not just your typical kind of like alt-right neo-Nazi, that he actually worked for Press TV. and has a background in Palestinian activism.
Mhm.
Also interesting, because it's my JQ debate with this guy, Cultural Thug, and he largely hit me with the degeneracy. That God forbid that he thinks Jews cause negative things to society, mostly social degeneracy and things like pornography. So I mean, you have your different angles of like
Yeah, I
Jews
know that that's
push
something that E. Michael Jones
multiculturalism
has written about.
and immigration. But it is interesting that I find the Jewish periodicals are seem to be pretty active on the pro-choice side. I mean, there's obviously that like immigration is a really big issue among the Jewish community in America. Abortion is also a pretty big issue where disproportionately Jews are extremely pro-choice. Even like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, someone like a secular Jewish hero, kind of refusing to retire almost largely to keep abortion legal. But yeah, I would agree that it's likely that it'll be restricted and overturned without too much protest. But as I mentioned, like I think I'm more pessimistic on the future of America, and I think that abortion is likely to be the issue that will drive America apart. Like, I argue with people, it's mostly kind of white nationalist or black nationalist that will talk about balkanization or why America can't work. But in terms of actual practicality of states maybe protesting each other or forming laws that make it inconceivable to have a static union, that it probably be the abortion issue, where saying you'll have Boston that will have extremely liberal abortion rights, and you'll have other states that
Right, which is fine.
might
That's the
completely
state's
ban
right.
it.
That's the state. I don't think they'll completely ban it, but nor do I think. I mean, look, it's really a state issue. I mean, the states have a certain level of sovereignty, and they represent the people and their values in each of those states. And you elect state representatives to express those values in state law. So, to me,
Where
that's
Trump came
proper.
through also.
That's the proper
the people
venue
like
for,
Trump was not really a man who represented traditional moral family values.
Yes, he did.
Well, I mean,
Yes, he did.
I mean, I would strongly disagree with that. I think
Well, maybe not
Christians and
personally, but yes, he
Orthodox
did.
Jews,
As a public,
absolutely not. Like that man was I mean, he was a pervert. He was he had he basically ran strip clubs, and he was not,
I get that, Dooovid, but I'm talking about as a matter of public policy, he did.
Yeah, in terms of public policy, he came through, like promises made, promises
kept. And also, I think that
no Orthodox Jew or Christian looked at Trump as a beacon of morality.
Well, he's not a rabbi or a priest.
He gave his word.
No. He fulfilled that word.
His word. And the main thing was his list of Supreme Court judges that he appointed.
And also, I think he was virtuous. He changed. I believe that Trump evolved, if you will, in the real meaning of the word, from somewhat of a libertine to somebody who did embrace moral values.
I think your average Orthodox Jew that supported him doesn't accept that. We're saying he kept his word.
Like, I think they do accept it.
We're not like you. We're not going to pretend like he was a good moral person or anything like that. Keep your daughters away from that man. It doesn't have to be a good, but first of all, he gave his word and he kept his word on those issues. He was a moral regardless leader of whether you'd want your daughter anywhere near him.
Fine. He was a moral leader who represented.
You're adding, let's say, like, no, I mean, for whatever reason, he kept his word. He kept his word.
He kept his word.
But if you want to say good things about him,
I think because he became Christian, and he also did, as a matter of public policy,
this form of Christianity which was in opposition to the majority.
He was a Presbyterian.
Christians.
He was a Presbyterian, and I think that he, as a matter of public policy, he did represent and fulfill the general conservative and moral code. And you can have people who are highly moral who don't do that. I mean, I don't know. Adolf Hitler comes to mind, probably as pristine as you could get personally, I would guess, but he wasn't fulfilling a moral code in his public administration.
It's kind of just like legislating from the bench. Also, I mean, the practical reality is that we do legislate from the bench, and Trump or the people who supported Trump in terms of the larger Christian Orthodox Jewish coalition that backed him recognize that we do legislate from the bench.
No, we don't legislate from the bench.
Well, I mean, the current American politics. And I think abortion was the main issue.
Yeah, that's
Actually, that
legislative event.
why Trump
That's
won
what's under
why
question.
Trump won the election. That when in terms of why Trump was able, like he had the immigration, abortion coalition, and abortion, as I said, in America is the single largest single issue voter. Like, a lot of Jews are single issue voters on Israel, but in terms of the American population on the pro-choice and the pro-life side, abortion is the single largest.
I understand. Dooovid,
single issue.
Look, you're right about that, but I do think that it's lessening. The abortion question is lessening. And I think
It's
that's
still the largest single issue voter. I mean, there's no single.
No, I think it's lessening.
Maybe immigration might.
And I think the reason it's lessening
to be another larger.
No, but I think the reason abortion is lessening.
What other issue besides abortion is the large single issue?
I'll address that, but let me just address abortion. I think the reason that abortion is lessening, and I think the vast majority of Americans are like me in that they recognize that abortion has to be legal, at least in the early stages, but they believe it's wrong and it's immoral. But, and you have the extremes on both sides. On the left, you have people who want to kill the baby after it's born. And on the right, you have people who want to have a constitutional amendment banning abortion in every case. That's rejected by 95% of the American people, who tend to fall in the middle, maybe slightly to the left of center, in my case, slightly to the right of center. But I would suggest to you that abortion is less polarizing now than it was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. And the reason for that is because of the science, because we now know more about the unborn baby and what that is and the experience. And the science is on the side of pro-life.
You mean, what about the polling? I was saying that probably 10%.
I think it's less
10,
so.
50, maybe even 20% of the people who voted for Trump purely voted for Trump on the abortion issue. And on the Democratic side also, I mean, you have the polling that people rank the issues, and on the extreme right and left, abortion is the
Yeah, but that's the extreme right and left. Most people are not on the extreme right or left. 95% of the country
of Americans on both sides.
No. 90%
the single
of the
most
country,
polarizing issue in all of America.
I get that, but 90% of the country is neither extreme right or extreme
Not
left.
90%. I'm saying like the abortion that is saying like 20% of America is extremely pro-life, 20% is extremely pro-choice. You have another,
all right, but then the rest
chunk.
of us are in the middle, and I think that the middle is
like
growing.
20% of Republicans are largely Republicans because they're pro-choice, and 20% of Democrats are Democrats largely because they're pro-choice.
Yeah, that's fine. 20% is a minority.
Immigration.
I think it's probably less than that. I think it's probably closer
that Trump stood out on that.
I think that I don't know the polling exactly, but I think that generally speaking, the hard left and the hard right position is probably held by a maximum of 10% at most. Most people are to the right or to the left of center on it. And again, I don't want to go over this again, but I think the science is moving people more to the middle, because the science is showing more people that abortion is killing, is wrong. And that, it should be regulated.
The science is moving people to the right, not to the middle.
It is slightly to the right, because the science is proving that the baby is a human being, and that the practice of abortion is horrendous. In fact, I don't know if you saw this testimony before Congress. This former abortion doctor.
I mean, you were talking eugenics. I mean, abortion is the supreme eugenics
absolutely.
issue.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood.
Yes, that's right. The Negro Project.
I mean, God forbid, even Richard Spencer, like main.
Oh, I'm sure. I don't doubt that.
He was
to call eugenic races. Oh, absolutely. That's the very core of the abortion movement.
Pro-choice in terms of racist eugenic argument.
No, that's the core of the abortion movement. It's
even a lot of neo-Nazis are.
Oh, I'm sure they are.
Matter because of the racial disparity in the numbers of people who have abortions.
Question. They want to call what Margaret Sanger called dysgenic races. And I think at the very core of the far left, whether they admit it or not, their support for abortion has to do with their desire to control people, who lives and who dies. That is it's a rejection of God and the idea that every human being is created in the image of God. It's this idea that man decides.
The Lubavitch Rebbe spoke up on issues in Palestine. He said that the Lubavitch Rebbe would not support anything that would limit the number of children that Palestinians had. and
Good.
consider the mitzvah of Puruvu, be fruitful, multiply,
Yeah.
is in
Okay.
Genesis applying to all of humanity. And there were multiple cases in Israel where the Lubavitch Rebbe
Well,
spoke
I'm
out
proud of
against
him for
Israel
that.
and saying that nothing should
They
be done to
shouldn't.
limit the number of children
They
Palestinians
shouldn't
have.
limit the number of children Palestinians have. The only question with Palestinians is maybe they should have the children somewhere else. But they shouldn't limit the number of children they have. I don't think anybody should do that. That's wrong and it's immoral. Let's talk about the Omnicom virus. There was an interesting poll done recently which shows that people on the left are very upset about it. They're in a state of hysteria. They're calling for lockdowns, triple masks, more vaxes, more boosters. They want to have a vax every 3 months. They want to have everybody in the world, completely surrendering their civil liberties because this horrible, evil virus. People on the right don't give a damn. They're ignoring it. And I think that so far the science of this, and this is coming out of South Africa, where the main epidemiologist was interviewed in the Gateway Pundit, and she said that this virus is much weaker than the past viruses. It's basically like having a bad cold. It doesn't even affect the sense of smell, and it doesn't, you have like you don't feel well for a few days. It's like a cold or a headache. People are not being hospitalized. It's not causing death. And the same population.
Vaccinated people aren't being hospitalized.
Well, I don't know about that. I actually don't think that's true. But putting that aside, the same population that is vulnerable to the original coronavirus, which is people over 80 years old or people who have a pre-existing condition, like they're obese, are the same people who ought to take extra care during this time. Now, in many other countries, and we can't talk about this on YouTube because it's censored. Let's just say that the governments are not only recommending various remedies that are inexpensive and that have been approved by the Food and Drug Administration for other uses, but they're actually giving them to people, and people are basically protecting themselves against the virus. And if they catch the virus, they have this particular drug, which one begins with an H and the other begins with an I, in their medicine cabinet. They're not expensive and they're very effective. It's the same drug that Green Bay Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers took and that radio host Joe Rogan took, and successfully, and as have millions of other people around the world. But in this country, it's a taboo topic. That's a whole interesting subject as to why that is. But the fact is that there are ways to protect your immune system. There are things you can take. I think I'm allowed to say vitamin D3, vitamin C, and zinc, which I take every day. And that to me is because those are over the counter. You can get them at CVS. But the other ones you're not allowed to talk about. The point I'm making here is that this is not a crisis. I think that this is something that is another opportunity for the international liberal establishment elite, the illuminated elite, the ruling class, to control us, to deprive us of civil liberties, to scare us. And I think their timing is a little off because I think they were hoping to do it in time for the midterm election so they can start papering the House with millions of ballots, just like they did last time. But I'm not going to go there either because that's also a subject that has been censored on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the politicization of it. I'm still listening to the Columbia professor, Vincent Racconello, seems relatively mainstream. So if you're vaccinated, it's unclear that this new variant represents any larger.
That may be. Look, I'm vaccinated. I'm not against the vaccine.
I mean, my sister, God forbid, is vaccinated, and she's and her husband still had to have.
But the problem is
IV and the monoclonal antibodies. But that was
because people in Israel and people in other countries were highly
in Chicago. She said they had like a car wash that was they pulled in like a abandoned car wash. They just gave her an IV, but that was able to solve it. But yeah, there's a fear-mongering tactic trying to get people to be vaccinated or trying to push for vaccine mandates and this idea that the vaccine will cure it, that I would say is largely unscientific, and
I agree.
talking
But let's
evolution,
be careful, Dovid. We can't
evolution
criticize.
earlier.
Let's not
And
criticize the vaccine. That's forbidden on YouTube.
well, I'm not
So
criticizing. I mean, saying I've been saying the
I'm
vaccine
nervous even
largely
discussing
prevents.
it.
About
Other than
I'm
to
talking
say,
about the mandates
yeah,
that
all right. But I don't even want to talk about the vaccine itself, other than to just say that I've had it. It's a personal choice. I'm neither endorsing or condemning. I
I
just think it's
streamed.
a personal
I
choice.
streamed Hanukkah lightings the last few days, Chabad, and I was like the only one wearing the mask. Some of the police officer, government officials, or non-Jewish staff helping were the only people
Wearing the mask.
wearing masks, and I was probably the only one, on
Was
vaccine.
wearing it. That I mean, look, I don't want to, again, I'm nervous even criticizing the masks on YouTube, but let me just say that we keep constantly seeing examples
It was
of,
outdoors. Obviously, it was outdoors by
well, I mean,
events,
I'm
but
talking indoors
I had the mask on
of
even
you have
outdoors.
like your
I
governor
can't
of
even go to my Chabad event Sunday. Like
because you're
even
not
these
vaccinated.
yeah,
Look,
even the local
COVID,
Chabad events, you got to be vaccinated to do the indoors. The outdoor
yeah,
one,
that's outrageous. But because people, whether you have it or not, people are wearing the mask because it spreads whether you've had the vaccine or not. So it seems to be a personal question. If you don't want the vaccine, that's your personal
well, it's like
choice.
a scare tactic, because
Yeah.
if you're vaccinated, your risk of severe sickness is extremely low. So other people not being vaccinated, I mean, there's definitely questions
That's right.
in the
Why
narrative
bought,
that they're spinning, because you
why
can
is it
still get the disease and spread it if you're vaccinated. And if you're
right?
vaccinated, your likelihood of having severe sickness is extremely limited. So why are they so worried about
Well, that's
people
right.
who are
What,
unvaccinated?
so
Obviously, in
what's
Michigan,
it's
we're having an extreme outbreak and people are unvaccinated.
Mhm.
The paper said today, Michigan, is, God forbid, we're approaching like 100 dead people a day, like 10%,
Well, then,
10%
David,
of
why is
cases
it?
in the nation are here in Michigan, but 75% of the people in hospitals are unvaccinated. So if you're saying that,
Well,
that if you're vaccinated, uh, how is it that unvaccinated people are posing a risk to you? They're posing,
that's right. And
I'm
also, I
posing a
think that
risk to myself.
large numbers of people in the hospitals are vaccinated, and large numbers of people dying are
Well, here in
vaccinated.
Michigan, no, 75, even though
Okay.
Michigan has like, 60, 70% of people are vaccinated, the people in the hospital now, 75%, according to today's paper, are unvaccinated. That means the vast majority of the people dying and sick in the hospital in Michigan are unvaccinated people. So, saying that that we're largely only a risk to ourselves. We're not a risk to people who've had
Okay,
the
fine. I agree.
vaccine. And it's even people who have the vaccine, like my sister, God forbid, who got the vaccine and still got it, but she didn't have severe sickness. So so
But,
it's
David, but the
some sort
question I
of
have is,
propaganda and political pressure
oh
that
yeah,
doesn't make logical sense. Like even like a 10-year-old
well,
kid
the whole thing
could
doesn't.
see, like, follow the logic of what they're saying. It doesn't add up.
I couldn't agree with you more. Why is it though that we constantly are seeing, at least it's covered by the Gateway Pundit, not so much by the mainstream media, the governor of Michigan, the governor of California, the governor of, the mayor of San Francisco, they put out a mandate for that you have to wear masks indoors, and then they go to a party and no one's masked, including them. And there's pictures released. If the mask is so wonderful, then why aren't they wearing it in those settings? I mean, we see videos of Nancy Pelosi putting on the mask for the media and giving an interview, and the minute she thinks the camera's off, she takes it off. So, it's
Even
just,
the mandates. I mean, here in Michigan, like
well,
a
that's the
year ago, we
question. I
weren't
mean, why
allowed to
is
do
it that it's
anything,
so?
and the numbers are worse than they were a year
Yeah,
ago
but I mean,
when
why
we
are
weren't
our
allowed to do
leaders who are
anything.
passing these laws saying you
But
have
I
to
mean,
put the?
because it was political. I mean, it was mainly political to get Trump out of office. But
I
whatever
agree.
the politics now, the numbers are just as bad as it was when
Well,
the
maybe it's
governor was
maybe
putting all
maybe
these
they're
mandates in now. And for whatever
well,
reason
they're
now,
hooked on.
she's
Maybe they're
not even
hooked on
mentioning
the.
it. She's not doing anything. She said she's not going to do any government
Is that right?
action. The only thing she wants is money from the federal government.
Well, look, I think that this whole thing is as I say, it's the midterm virus. They're hoping that this can give them an excuse to paper the House with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of
For her
unsolicited
constituent. I mean, the
ballots.
unspoken is the racial issue, is that the largest group of unvaccinated people is African
Yeah,
Americans,
that's
and
right.
that's
And
the
Black
main
Lives Matter is,
Democratic
I know,
constituency.
and Black
So
Lives
that
Matter has come out against the mandates and against the vaccine passports.
so
So
they
anyway,
want to put it in a way to like crack down on right wing white people, but the fact is that, I mean, there's vaccine hesitancy among all sorts of people, but the Democrats are getting pushback from their largest constituency, which is African Americans.
Good. I hope that they do push them back. So what else is new, David?
Well, I'm saying they did push them back, and then saying that's why the mandates in Michigan aren't happening.
Good. Well, that's what you need. Enough people from both sides to say we're not accepting this tyranny. So what else is going on?
Well, so I kept, we had talked about the Great Replacement, where I was kind of forced to, I'm more, I'm capable of talking about things absent of moral judgment. And so just explaining, like, this is what people believe, this is what they're saying, without passing a judgment on it. But I mean, last week we talked about the Great Replacement, and then I see like Eric Zamora is basically running on the Great Replacement. I look, and it's ironic that he is a Algerian Jew, and it's kind of interesting that that the door that opened to mass Muslim migration and into France was largely the first major allowance of migration was when they allowed the Algerian Jews. I guess Algeria was a French territory, and then it became emancipated, and they allowed largely just the Jews from Algeria to come from Africa to France, and it was only the Jews that they allowed in the beginning. So the first major migrant group.
What about Christians?
Well, there wasn't a large Christian population.
A large French population in Algeria.
You say historically, I have to look up the
no, Algeria. Look it up, because Algeria was
when they first allowed
Algeria was taken over by France.
People, it was Algerian.
I understand, but I would just note of it that Algeria was taken over by France in 1830. It wasn't recent, and it was an integral part of France for 100 years. It was very French. And I would guess that they must have had a reasonable percentage of Christians in Algeria. So, I mean, I don't know the details of the history, but I wonder what happened to them, because once France was driven out of Algeria, the regime there, I think it's safe to say, it was fairly radical Islamic.
This was 1870 that after the Muslims, I guess 1865, they start having issues with French control. I guess Napoleon conquered the area, and
1830, yeah.
And so in 1870, France gave 33,000 citizenships to Algerian Jews. So specifically that it was only Algerian Jews that they granted 33,000 citizenships, and most of those Jews left Algeria in Africa and moved into France, and it was
France and Israel.
Well, no, this was in 1870. None of them went to Israel. All of them went from Algeria. 33,000 people went from Algeria to France in 1870.
Oh, okay.
And it was, whatever the politics of the reason of the falling apart of the colonialization, that they let 33,000 Algerian Jews.
That's interesting. I wonder why.
France, in this was 1870. So
I know, because that was right around the time. I mean, France was somewhat anti-Semitic back then. I mean, the Dreyfus trial was in the 1880s or 90s. But whenever, I mean, it seems unusual. I mean, it's an interesting piece of history. I don't know a lot about it.
It's ironic that Zamora is an Algerian Jew and his wife is Tunisian. That's my phone ringing in the background. Okay. I'll get it after. So and so he's largely preaching Great Replacement, that France is no longer France, and his arguments basically mirror, like he gave this opening speech, and it basically mirrors God forbid the New Zealand murderer Christchurch manifesto called the Great Replacement, where he says, like, France isn't France anymore. Everywhere you go, it's filled with migrants and other people. So, the irony that he's an Algerian Jew, although, his ancestors probably came to France, over 100 years ago, and his wife, comes from Tunisian French immigrants. And it's possible also, like, that, like the Pen or something, that you're getting a larger voice because anti-Semitism is considered more dangerous than anti-Islam. So you have a Jewish man rising that has anti-immigrant, anti-Islamic sentiments and historic, saying that the Jews were largely led into France because they were, protected against pending disaster from Islamicists, that when France relinquished control of Algeria, that they thought I think this was part of it, that they thought the Algerian Jews would have been in grave danger, and therefore they allowed them to leave and come into France. And so this question,
but that was in the 1960s.
I'm telling you, it was in it was in 1870.
Oh, okay, because I know France didn't.
It was way before World War I. 1870.
Right, because France
the Algerian
didn't. I don't know a lot about that history, but I know that France did not relinquish, as you say, Algeria until the 1960s.
Something happened that they had wars or lack of control.
Well, what does this have to do with the so-called Great Replacement theory?
That Zemmour is running largely on immigration and in the return.
Is he running in France for prime minister? Is that who he is?
Yeah, he's running against
what's his face? Yeah,
it's slipping me even to the
Economist.
The one who worked for Rothschild Bank America, the older one, the Crone.
Yeah, Macron. Yeah, he worked for BlackRock.
So I mean, he was kind of a journalist and right-wing radio broadcast. I'm not even sure how famous. If you compare him to something like Mike Imus or something like that, or well, I was saying that he's a Jewish right-wing broadcaster that doesn't speak on behalf of any Jewish organization. I don't know if you'd compare him to the guy in California, or who you'd even compare him to in America. So I mean, he's not like a prominent.
I mean, that's
Jewish
like
activist.
me. I'm a Jewish right-wing talk show host who doesn't speak for any group.
But I mean, he's got millions of viewers. But I mean,
I have like 10. I know what you mean.
But I'm saying that I mean, he's a known name. And that's why he has chances of winning. That's why I compared him to someone like Mike Imus or something like that.
Don Imus. And Don Imus was not Jewish, by the way.
I think he was Jewish.
No, he was not Jewish.
I have to check that, but
check it out. No, I don't think he was.
But it'd be someone like that. Okay, he's part Jewish.
Whatever.
Imus has some Jewish blood. He was mixed blooded, maybe minority.
I don't think Jewish. He was Jew. I never really saw. I don't believe he was. But anyways, getting back to the subject, because we're reaching toward the end, and I don't want to ramble too much. What's the deal? What's the deal with the Great Replacement? That is an immigration question, in that a sovereign nation wants to maintain a certain cultural identity and ethnic identity. So the idea is that France should be French, Germany should be German, Spain should be Spanish, Algeria should be Algerian, and that there is a certain cultural makeup.
That he put, and even YouTube put a warning on it. And ironically, the Chabad Lubavitch webpage that has thousands of videos of the Rebbe got like a strike and was taken off of YouTube. And I'm not sure, like the level of censorship.
And this is because they supported.
No, that was just this week. I was just randomly mentioning it, but the.
Well, then let's not mention it, Dooovid. I mean, I don't want to get taken down.
I was saying that even.
Let's be very generic about this.
Zemmer's opening video has a warning for adults only, and it mirrors kind of was written in the God forbid the Great Replacement manifesto, saying France isn't France anymore. Everywhere you look, there's no longer French people. It's all immigrants from other countries.
Sure.
And everything that historically people connect with France is no longer around, and it's all these new foreign ideas, and you have to make France again. And he's been an outspoken critic of Islam and African migration for years. That was the main point of his radio popularity.
All right, and he was taken down for that, right? Okay, fine.
But it wasn't taken down. It has a like you have to click through as an adult, and
I understand
sensitive topic. And this is the actual presidential, prime ministerial candidate. But that's
they took down Donald Trump, and he censored off of the TikTok, off of Twitter and Facebook. Anyway,
I mentioned in the U.S. that abortion is the single largest single issue voter, and then immigration is probably the second one. In Europe, I think immigration is already the single largest single voter issue. So that's basically his issue. He's saying that,
all right, it's an interesting one. I think that immigration is too broad an issue for us to get into right now at the end of the program. It's a complex issue, like a lot of these others, that needs to be looked at with a great deal of nuance. I want to mention as a program note that I am experimenting with going live and changing the time of my show to 10 to midnight Eastern time. There's a lot of reasons why I'm doing this. I expect I'm going to officially roll it out at the first of the year, but in the meantime, I'm just experimenting with the live stream at that time because I think that maybe, well, for professional reasons, I think I might be able to capture a larger audience at that time. There's less competition, there's less clutter. There's a lot going on on these internet stations at noon. Whereas I think there's a little bit more of a broad opening for me at that time.
I'd probably work with you if you want to switch our thing to try it at night. That's fine. And also, I didn't get a copy of your book yet. So if you email me that, I'll try to read through it. And then
thank you. I'll email it.
Maybe I'll interview you and I'll try to counter argue every point from the other perspective of.
I'll send you the ebook. And anyway, the reasons I want to do it also are that I think I might be able to attract a sponsor, and I might be able to even get some radio stations to carry the show, because radio stations at that time of the night are looking for content. And my goal here has been to build an online, active, live stream community where people can call in. They can join me. We can develop a regular experience.
You're not taking advantage of the technology. I mean, for example, you have people in the YouTube chat that like I'm reading and like I could try to interrupt and tell you what they're saying, but you should take advantage.
I need help on that, Dooovid.
Ralph here in the chat's a tech guy.
Tell him to call me because I need help. I'm very bad.
Your phone number?
Yes, give him my phone number and give him my email because I am very bad at technology. I'm very primitive in that way. I'm very unevolved. The fact is, I can't look at the
interactive. Like
I do, and I want to get that.
Radio is old technology.
I agree, and I'm an old radio guy.
People want interactive content, and even calling in. That the call-in is probably not the way. You have to have.
Well, I want to offer call-in.
You might even want something that you might have to have someone else do for you, but
I agree.
Like
and I'm willing to do it
on the screen. Like as
I need
you're
help.
talking, the comment, and I'm not even that much. But yes, I'll give Ralph in London.
Tell Ralph to contact me.
He's
and
a banking programming expert.
Yes, and I need some things like I want to get a bumper, and I need some basics, and I'm not like good at that, but. I feel like, and also it does free up my schedule during the day because I've got a lot of other things going on. I've got family stuff. I got professional stuff. So it's the one time of the day where I can really do.
We talk about it. I mean, we're already over an hour. I was on these streams in London and have you heard of Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, London?
No.
I mean, just very quickly, it's old, going back hundreds of years, just a famous place where people give public speeches.
Oh, yeah, I know about
anybody, so anyone could. And that's where Ralph, when he started trying to make a political party, gave speeches. And now it's actually, I think it's like half Muslim that currently Speaker's Corner, you find all sorts of Islamicists in the neighborhood. So I got on these programs in London, Muslim people that also have, in real life, activists preaching in this place.
Well, ask him to come on with me. I'll interview, and I'll interview the Muslim speakers too. But the thing is that I'm hoping that I can build a live community. The reason I don't.
You have to take advantage of the technology.
I agree.
Let me
just say, Dooovid, the reason I have not looked at the chats on YouTube is because every time I turn on the YouTube, the voiceover over bounces because I do the program through Zoom, and then I get two things going on, and it echoes. So if I can figure out technically how to do this and other things. I mean, the fact is that my show does stream on about 10 streams every time I do
Ralph may be able to do one of these things where you screen share and he helps you with your computer, but you probably need someone in your house in the Boston area that's actually going to come in and stand over.
No, I don't. I can't do it that way. I'm going to have to do it remotely. But the thing is, I think that.
Well, I don't mean like a permanent, but you need someone that's actually going to be there in the room with you to show you how to do this stuff. It's going to be difficult and time consuming to explain it over the phone. And
no, I understand that, but I think it's the kind of thing. It's like learning how to drive. Once you know how to do it, it becomes second nature, and it's like setting it up. Like I finally was able.
You can't learn how to drive over Zoom. You need someone.
No, but I did. What I did was I hired somebody through Fiverr, actually, which is this great website, like for $50, to set up a means by which every time I go on Zoom, the show automatically live streams on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and about 5 other live Zooms. And it's all I need to do is turn it on. I don't have to do nothing else. And it's
Ralph's in the
amazing.
chat, actually. He said he'll help you. So I'm actually, right
All
when
right.
we're done, I'm going to
Thank you.
text, I'm going to message him your phone number. So maybe
Thank
we
you.
can call you, right away. And like definitely
Good.
work together. There's other people that work together.
Yes.
And, it's important to
It is.
to use
Really.
the technology properly. I think that's the main thing that that's going to be needed to get your show going.
Quite
is to
clearly.
maximize the use of the technology as it is, like, because just
Yes.
taking the radio model to the internet isn't enough.
No, I couldn't agree more, and I really need help in that area. So thank you very much. All right, Dooovid, what do you have coming up on your show?
I might actually buy the new M book. It looks like $3,000, but thank God my eBay business been going pretty good. So I put aside some money. I might invest in a new computer system. I don't have I streamed IRL 2 local Chabad Hanukkah events. The one we had like a menorah parade, and we had the fire station that's like Chabads are doing. We have like a fire truck stick the ladder up and drop chocolate gelt coins from the sky.
Nice.
So it was popular among the kids, and we had a concert. And so that's about it.
What's the M book?
It's the new chip from Apple, the new
Okay.
the latest technology.
And what does it do that's so wonderful?
I mean, it just has higher quality of everything to be able to process more things of the same thing, higher quality microphone, speaker, faster internet, faster processing, graphics processing. So everything, it doesn't, do anything, like new magical, but everything that currently is being done, it does it
faster
better and higher quality. And
all right, Dooovid, listen, thanks a lot.
Happy Zobita in London. So Ralph didn't stream this week. If he did, so I was on last week quite a few times with him. And then this new woman, Zobita, this London Muslim preacher. So maybe we talk about that.
Tell her to contact me. We'll put her on.
Okay, great. So happy Hanukkah.
Right,
people. Don't
happy
forget
Hanukkah
tonight's the 5th night of Hanukkah.
Yes.
Sunday night's the last night of 8 nights. So happy Hanukkah, everybody. I'm going to text. I'm going to give Ralph your number right after this, and don't forget to send me your book, and then
Will do.
I'll try to read that